If I thought that raising the minimum wage was the best way to help people increase their pay, I would be all for it, but it isn't. In the 21st century, it's a disaster. If you raise the minimum wage, you're going to make people more expensive than a machine. And that means all this automation that's replacing jobs and people right now is only going to be accelerated. Here's the best way to raise wages. Make America the best place in the world to start a business or expand an existing business. Tax reform and regulatory reform. Bring our debt under control. Fully utilize our energy resources so we can reinvigorate manufacturing.
The minimum wage is a keystone of the United States labor system, and has been a cutting-edge labor law topic among employers and workers alike for decades. However, the United States has not always had a minimum wage. Before the minimum wage was introduced during the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was no national minimum wage, or any legislation to protect workers from exploitation. Due to the lack of regulation, tens of thousands of workers were routinely exploited in sweatshops and factories, forced to work in horrible conditions and for pennies a week. Early attempts by labor unions to create a mandatory minimum wage were ruled unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court on the grounds that they restricted the worker's right to set the price for his own labor. This allowed employers to continue exploiting their workers through the Great Depression of the 1930s, when incredible demand for jobs caused wages to drop even further to an all-time low. With poverty becoming a huge national issue, President Franklin Roosevelt promised to constitutionally protect American workers as a key of his 1936 re-election campaign. After winning the election, President Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, into law in 1938. This act introduced regulations to protect American workers from being exploited and created a mandatory federal minimum wage of 25 cents an hour in order to maintain a minimum standard of living for general well-being without substantially curtailing employment. In addition to establishing a mandatory nationwide minimum wage, the Fair Labor Standards Act introduced many other workers' protection laws still in effect today, including banning child labor and establishing workplace safety statutes. In the years since the Fair Labor Act was introduced, the federal minimum wage was revised by Congress every few years to account for inflation and the ever-rising cost of living. Although in the years after the act was introduced, Congress has actually reduced the minimum wage several times. In 1997, President Bill Clinton signed legislation allowing individual states to set the minimum wage. As a result, several states have wages that are higher than the federal.
One of the basic lessons of economics is that when the price of something goes up, people buy less of it. So, if the price of pumpkin lattes rises, you can expect consumers to buy fewer of them. This law of demand also affects the market for low-skilled workers. Raising the minimum wage means a higher cost of employing each worker, which makes workers less affordable than before. Our coffee shop won't keep a worker at the mandated $15 per hour if that worker's efforts only result in $7.25 per hour in added revenue. Over the course of a year, a shop that keeps such a worker full-time would lose $15,500. So instead, it will eliminate that job. And evidence shows that employers in fact do respond in this way to minimum wage hikes. Recent research by economists Jeffrey Clemens and Michael Wither finds that 1.4 million jobs were destroyed in the late 2000s when the minimum wage rose across all 50 states by an average of nearly 30%. And worse, those job losses were probably suffered by the people who need jobs the most. This fact brings us to reason number 2. The minimum wage actually hurts the people we most want to help. When the minimum wage rises, the workers fired first and the ones hired last are those who employers judge to be the least productive. The inner-city teen from the lousy school district, or the immigrant with poor English, will be fired before the suburban American teen from the excellent school district. So those who are most disadvantaged tend to suffer the most job losses. This reality is compounded by the fact that raising the minimum wage causes more competition for jobs. A supermarket job that once paid $8 per hour draws more applicants when it pays $15 per hour. Applicants who include retirees and people with higher education, who re-enter the workforce only because of the higher wage. Because these people often have more skills, they squeeze out immigrants and those from disadvantaged backgrounds who are likely more desperate for the jobs and certainly more desperate to gain job experience.
The fight to raise minimum wage has led to many conflicting research articles and surveys. But most surveys agree that there will be the adverse effect of inflation if the minimum wage is increased. Most notable though is the effects the increase will have on profits for business. Many businesses will need to cut back on employment and raise costs in order to support the inflation. The effect of cutbacks on employment is predicted to have the most impact on the poor who already struggle to find low-skill jobs. Most notable though is the effects the increase will have on profits for business. Many businesses will need to cut back on employment and raise costs in order to support the inflation. The effect of cutbacks on employment is predicted to have the most impact on the poor who already struggle to find low-skill jobs. The fight for raising minimum wage has affected our media and social media outlets. Hashtag like Fight for 15 and slogans such as Strike for 15 have been created to show support of the raise. Leaders, such as Dolores Herda, have emerged to continue the efforts and help organize rallies. Protests have broken out in many places such as Miami, Chicago, Boston, Detroit, Little Rock. The list is vast. In 2014 the protest became heated and a total of 436 people were arrested in multiple cities.